Yá'át'ééh, good morning, my relatives. It is about a bit after 11 on June 19. It's a Wednesday. I'm sitting down with my second cup of coffee. I actually have a different cup today. I was about ready to go live. I just pressed the live button. I realized, oh, I forgot to get my favorite blueberry flower cup. But anyway, so now you see my other cup. This is the cup I normally drink my coffee out of when I'm out running errands or I'm out of the house because it keeps my coffee fairly warm for a while. And I always tell people I drink coffee the same way I imagine Jesus would drink coffee, which is either like it piping hot or ice cold. If it's lukewarm, I'll spew it out of my mouth. Anyway, Yá'át'ééh, my relatives, it's good to have you join me this morning. I hope your morning is going well. I want to begin like I always do, which is acknowledging I'm on the traditional lands of the Piscataway. I moved with my family from the Navajo Nation here to Washington, or Washington, D.C. about 9 years ago. And I want to honor the Piscataway as the host peoples of the lands where I'm living. I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands. And I just want to state how humbled I am to be living and moving and breathing on these lands today. So there's a few things I want to talk about this morning. And let me see who's online with me. I know there's a few people jumping on. George, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining. It's good to have you with me. I hope you have a cup of your favorite morning beverage. And I'm glad that you could be here with me. I'm very excited. I was able to buy several bags of my favorite coffee. I went to the Rwandan coffee shop here in DC that I only get to every now and then because it's a little ways away. And I was there yesterday, and I was able to get a few bags of some of my favorite beans there. Plus, I'm drinking, this morning I'm drinking a bag of coffee from a local Ethiopian coffee shop that I like to frequent. And so, yeah, I have an abundance of really good coffee in my house right now, and that makes me very excited. But I wanted to talk to you because as I was thinking about what to discuss this week and what I wanted to do in my second cup of coffee, I found there's something changing in my mind, and I've been wrestling to put my finger on it. I noticed it very clearly when I was asked to write an op-ed regarding the Indian Citizenship Act. And I wrote 3 drafts of that op-ed. And I never got it to the point where I felt satisfied by that op-ed. In fact, even my wife, she read it, one of my final versions, and she said, Mark, it feels like you're doing this as an assignment. It doesn't feel like your emotions are really in it. And so I eventually called the publication and said, I'm sorry, I don't have it in me. I don't know what my thoughts are regarding all of this. Not that I don't have thoughts, but I wasn't satisfied with the way I was articulating them. Then just last weekend, I was called and asked to give a quote or a response to an apology by the Catholic Church, a very inadequate apology that they gave for past abuses, including residential schools. And I it's not that I don't have an opinion on it, but I didn't end up giving a quote, and I just didn't feel it didn't feel appropriate. I didn't feel ready maybe to give a quote there. And then this week, as I mean, and there's a lot going on, right? Trump is being convicted of felonies. Joe Biden's son is being convicted of crimes. We're getting a race between 2 very old men that really no one in the country wants. I mean, there's a war in Gaza, there's a war in Ukraine, right? There is so many things to talk about, so many things to scream about, so many things to get upset about and to point out and to say, if we can only do better, if we can only do this different, right? There's not a lack of things going on right now. But something has been happening to me, and I've talked about it before. Earlier this year, and most of you know, I have been getting into barefoot running, and it was about 4 or 5 months ago, I began working out, running, and breaking a sweat first thing in the morning. It's something I started doing. Maybe it was back in February or maybe March. I forget exactly when it was, but it was earlier in this year. And I've always been moving. I had my hip replaced about a year ago, and I've been walking a lot and adding movement back into my life and getting more and more strength back in my hip. And I knew I was getting to the point where I wanted to run and play basketball again, do things like that. And so earlier this year, in February or March, I think it was, I actually started running, um, and I breaking a sweat early in the morning. And I realized, right, and I've talked about this, where it was almost 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, that I began watching the sunrise as a spiritual discipline. And that's had a massive impact on me as I've gotten to know Creator in a whole new way. And I've been able to just experience this discipline of my people of greeting the sunrise with my prayers. But I didn't do it completely. You're supposed to run to greet the sunrise. And because of where I was and which way I would have had to run, I didn't run. I walked a short distance and watched the sunrise every morning when I was on the reservation. And here I drive to the sunrise. And so I wasn't running. And so when I started running again, I realized I was adding something in that I probably should have added in 20 years ago, which was not only the discipline of watching the sunrise, but the discipline of running in the mornings as well. And if I go back far enough, right, my people would have been running in moccasins at best, if not actually barefoot. And that would have been part of the discipline too. And so after maybe a month or two of running, and I would go out running in the mornings, I'd wear my headphones, I'd have my music with me, it would kind of pump me up and get my blood flowing. And after a few months of that, I realized, no, I don't want to just have this be something that I do for exercise. I wanted it to be more of a spiritual discipline. Just like watching the sunrise was a spiritual discipline for me. I wanted my running to be a spiritual discipline. So I decided to start leaving my headphones at home. And then I actually switched to actual barefoot running. I literally run in bare feet. I have a lot of barefoot shoes, but I began actually running in bare feet on a field near my house where I run on some turf, and it actually works out really well. And after I started running, even before I turned it into a spiritual discipline, one of the things I noticed that was happening in my body was I was feeling better than I felt in probably 20 or 30 years. I was to wake up in the morning and break a sweat and exert that energy early in the morning felt absolutely amazing. It reminded me of when I was coaching basketball 20 years ago, and I would get up 3 mornings a week, 5:30 on Mondays and Thursdays and 6:30 on Saturdays, and play basketball with a group of guys. And to get up and exercise and break a sweat that early in the morning felt wonderful. And it felt like that again, like I was doing that again. I felt like literally I was 20 years ago, 25 years ago in what I was doing. But one of the things I noticed, and I mentioned this in an earlier podcast, was I began to have a greater degree of what I would just label impulse control. Right? Every community, every city, every part of the country has their critique of the drivers in their area and the way people drive. And if you drive in any place long enough, you will get irritated by the way people in your area drive. And that certainly is true here in DC. It was true in LA. It was true in Denver, right? All the places I've lived. And here, the difference here in DC and even on the East Coast is people in this area are much more prone to honking at you than they are in other part of the countries where I've lived before. And so honking is literally like a part of the way you communicate when you're on the roads in DC, and you honk at people who are not pulling away from red lights quick enough, or or when the lights turn quick enough, or not turning in the right time. All right, you honk at people, and it's much more I don't know if accepted, but it's something that happens much more frequently here. But it also adds to the irritability of everybody who's driving. And ashamed to say that I became a honker when I moved here. I participated in that way of communicating, and I would honk my horn frequently. And what it did is it made driving a much more agitated experience. Um, but I just kind of accepted that, and I knew I was feeling that agitation, and it would come out in my honk sometimes, but I knew that was going on. And when I started running in the morning, I started breaking a sweat in the morning. And then later in that morning, I would drive my daughters to the metro, where they would take the metro to school. And very quickly, I realized I was honking less, if even at all. Even if people were sitting at a green light, staring at their phone, texting someone, and not moving at all, I was much less prone to honking at them. And my daughters even noticed it. And I realized it wasn't that I wasn't irritated by these behaviors. I was still irritated by it. But I had a greater sense of impulse control. I recognized that the world around me is incredibly agitated and on edge. And sometimes it's almost like a pot just simmering, ready to boil over. And sometimes a honk can send someone over the edge, and they start chasing you or following you. Right? I mean, you've seen this happen. We've all experienced this at some level, where people just get right. They're just at the edge, and a honk will kind of put them over the edge. And so I realized, I noticed that after I began running in the mornings, throughout the rest of the day, I had a greater level of impulse control, where I still felt agitated, but I was able to actually temper my response to the agitation and say, honking in most instances is only going to exacerbate the situation. And it's not going to help the person in front of me. It's only going to make them more irritable, and it's going to make them more on edge. And it's just going to start this snowball effect that who knows where it's going to go throughout the rest of the day. And I noticed that pretty quickly. And I kind of chuckled at it, and I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. And I didn't think much more about it. But as I began continuing doing my second cups of coffee and listening to the dialogues going on the news and in the media, I found myself less and less listening to the news, less and less reading the news. Not that I wasn't aware of what was going on, but I didn't spend near as much time as I used to listening to news podcasts and getting all the headlines and staying on top of everything. I still kept abreast of what was going on. And I began to see, whether it was friends of mine, our colleagues of mine, our peers of mine, who normally would respond to these things in the same way that I would respond to them. And I realized a lot of my friends, or a lot of the people who I know, were writing op-eds and interjecting into the dialogue here and interjecting there and all these things. And I was much more standing back more frequently, not saying anything. Almost like, right, when I'm sitting at the red light, knowing the person in front of me is looking at their phone, texting someone, not paying attention to the fact that the lights turn green and they're not moving. And I'm just observing this, but I'm having this impulse control to not throw myself immediately into that conversation, because I don't just want the car in front of me to move at that moment. I want to actually help people live with a greater sense of peace throughout the day. And honking at someone probably won't help that person to move through their day less agitated. And so I think that's where this has led to, where I see the things that are going on, and I observe the screaming people are doing in the op-eds, and I observe the way everyone is pointing out every little thing and getting nitpicky. Not that there's not injustice out there, there absolutely is, and things need to be called out and need to be pointed out. But on the other hand, like, what's going to be the most beneficial way to bring about the change we're looking for? Right? I mean, right now, the Republicans and Democrats are absolutely crying about the way the justice system has become criminalized, right? The way the parties are using the criminal justice system to punish their opponents. Both parties, both sides are doing it. And they're screaming, and the news is covering it, right? The criminal justice system is being weaponized, and they're like, it's like they learned something. It's like, no, we've been trying to tell you this system has been weaponized for hundreds of years, right? I mean, people of color know this system is weaponized. Just because it's being weaponized against white people doesn't mean it's something new. This is what happens. This system we have is absolutely a weapon. It's not about justice. It's about punishing those who you see as less than, are marginalized, are enemies to you. That is what this criminal justice system is about. The news, I guess, is that it's happening to white people more frequently now. But the fact that it's been weaponized, that it was created as a weapon. We know that. So what's the best way to respond to Trump or to Biden, to Democrats or to Republicans, to white people on either side of the aisle who are finally recognizing, hey, this system we have is a weapon? Yeah, no duh. We've known that for quite a while. It's like screaming at them isn't going to help. And so I'm observing this, and I'm watching these things, and I'm like, okay, what is going to be the way that's going to bring about better change? And just like after my campaign, I realized that one of the things that gave me the tools I needed to look directly at the doctrine of discovery and to wrestle with that history as much as I did was watching the sunrise in the morning and building a radically different relationship with Creator than I had built when I was in church. And so when I started watching the sunrise again after my campaign, I not only watched the sunrise, I began live streaming it. Because I realized if I want my nation to engage in a dialogue with its history that our country is terrified to look at, I need to give them the same tools I used to look at these things, which was watching the sunrise. And so I literally intentionally began live streaming the sunrises as a way to disciple and invite the nation into this discipline that I found so beneficial in my life. And now I can't help but wonder and ask, as over the past year, right? And in the past year, I've lost 30 pounds, which is amazing. I feel healthier than I felt in 25, 30 years of my life. I don't even remember the last time I weighed the weight I weigh now. And I'm recognizing the benefits of barefoot running, of using running as a spiritual discipline, of sweating and breaking a sweat early in the morning, and the way all of these things of eating healthier and the whole thing I talked about a few last week about movement versus exercise. Instead of just adding exercise into my life, I'm adding movement. And I'm making my days much more active, which is leading to me being healthier. It's not because I go to the gym, it's because I'm out walking and moving. I walk to the grocery store, I walk to the coffee shop, I walk to my office. I walk. I'm now learning how to dictate my books so I can walk while I'm working. I'm learning how to sit on the floor instead of in a chair. I'm learning how to keep my legs stretched and how to be moving and squatting and hanging from bars more, right? I'm doing all these things, adding movement back into my life, not as exercise, but as part of my just daily routines. And doing these things not only gives me a greater sense of peace throughout the day, but it also gives me a greater ability to control my impulses and to not respond as aggressively or as quickly as I used to respond when something would irritate or agitate me, whether it was about race or whether it was about the car sitting in front of me on the road. And so I'm realizing, like, if I want my nation to treat one another better, just like if I want my nation to deal with its history, I have to teach my nation how to watch the sunrise. If I want my nation to treat each other better and to yell at each other less and to treat better people with greater respect, part of my work is not just about calling these things out and pointing these things out. It's about helping mentor or disciple or train my nation to flat out be healthier, to eat better, to move more, to break a sweat in the morning, right? One of the reasons we are so agitated is because I think our bodies are so incredibly unhealthy. And this isn't new, right? This isn't the latest book or the latest. This is what my people knew. Who knows for how many hundreds of years our Navajo people have been waking up in the morning, running to the east, and greeting the sunrise with our prayers. This is what we do. And it leads to a much healthier body, mind, and soul. So this is one of the reasons I'm not responding to everything that's coming out right now, because I'm radically rethinking not only how do I need to add more movement back into my life and stay healthy and stay engaged and stay active. And I'm literally learning how to do this as we speak. You probably saw my pictures on social media over the weekend where I bought some toed running shoes. My family bought it for me for Father's Day, and I'm running in those now when I'm not able to run on the field. This morning, the field where I usually go was closed because it's a holiday today, and so I went running at the Arboretum, which is not too far from my house and was open today. And I went running in those barefoot shoes, those toed shoes. I've become one of those gloved shoe people. But anyway, so I'm still learning. How do I move? I bought a floor desk the other day that I can sit on the floor and do. This is a picture of my shoes this morning when I was down by the Potomac River running. Actually, this is the walk I took after I ran, but because I didn't take my phone with me when I ran. But this was down by the Potomac, actually where I write normally. And so, but anyway, and so yeah, so I'm trying to figure out, how do I do this? How do I not just point out the injustices, but if I want my nation to treat not only each other better, but the globe better, part of that solution has to be teaching my nation how to be healthier, because we are absolutely chronically ill, right? As a society, our eating patterns are horrible, our exercise patterns are horrible. We're more sedentary than probably any other society in the history of the world. It's no wonder we're screaming at each other all day long. So it has to be a much more comprehensive or whole solution that has to include, yes, creating more just laws, yes, confronting unjust systems and systemic racism and sexism and white supremacy, but also training people how to watch the sunrise, how to respect their own bodies. How can I get our country, how can I get white people to respect the bodies of people of color when they don't even respect their own bodies? They don't. Look at the way they treat the society. Look at the way it's trained not only themselves, but us to treat our bodies. Look at the crap we eat. Look at the way we sit, the way all these things. There has to be a much more comprehensive solution. And this is why at the moment I'm not responding to every little injustice that I'm seeing out there, because I'm literally trying to filter through what does it mean to have a much more wholesome, comprehensive response, reaction, and call. Anyway, my relatives, I'm so glad you're with me on this journey. I appreciate all of you being a part of the work that I'm doing. I thank you for joining me regularly for a good cup of coffee. Shantina, Yá'át'ééh, abiní, thanks for being here. Laquilla, thank you for being here. Heart and Soul, thank you for being here. Remington, Rathjen, thank you for being here. I appreciate all of you. Debbie, Yá'át'ééh, Mary, thank you for being here. It's so good to have all of you with me today. I want to just share with you one thing. In this past 6 months, and this year, I was just looking at this the other day, my work has literally slowed by about 2/3. I have had about 2/3 less paid speaking gigs this year than I had at this point last year. And even in the past few months, I've lost 2 long-term partners, like partners I've had for nearly a decade or even longer, who have either kind of ghosted me or even said, we're not going to partner with you anymore. Your message is a bit too radical. And this happens all the time. On one hand, I'm not surprised. It's a bit more challenging when it comes from institutions that I've been working with for so long. But this is one of the reasons why I work so hard to keep my voice as independent as possible. And so if you want to help continue to keep my voice independent and help continue my work, I invite you to subscribe to my site on Patreon. It's a great way to go deeper into the conversation, to get more content. I have Q&As, I have interviews, I have presentations and lectures. I have a lot of things as I take the conversation deeper going on a monthly basis. I welcome you to help me keep my voice independent by subscribing to my Patreon. I also want to encourage you, if you're thinking about doing a book study this summer with a group of people, you can buy 10 copies of Unsettling Truths on my website. Shipping is free. And if you buy that 10 book pack, I will give your study a 45-minute virtual Q&A at some point over the next year, whenever you want to schedule that with me. And so I welcome you to start those book studies. I would love to be a part. I do usually one of these Q&As a week. I've sold so many of these over the past couple of years, but I do about 1 or 2 of these a week. In fact, I'm doing one this evening. And I love these conversations. I love having dialogue with people who've read the book as a group and have reflected on it and have questions. It's a much different Q&A, every one of these sessions, than the Q&As I have after I speak. And those are some of the conversations I literally live for. And so I'm so grateful. So if you'd like to be a part of that, I welcome you to start a book study, and you can join Unsettling Truths. Also, just on my Patreon, once a month, I have a Q&A. And it's just an open time to have some dialogue and question and answer about things I've been talking about, things I've written, things that are going on my second cup of coffee. There's a lot of ways to continue to engage. So thank you, my relatives. I'm so grateful for all of you. Hope you have a great day. Thanks for joining me for a second cup of coffee. Walk in beauty, my relatives. And may we all learn how to walk in beauty together. Hako on that.